That was the best acting I've ever seen in my whole life.
If you have an internet connection, a newspaper subscription, a phone, or even just a pair of human eyes, you're probably aware of method acting. You probably heard all the on-set antics or the extreme physical transformations of these actors who are trying to inhabit their roles as realistically as they can.
You don't get these lines right, I'm gonna blow your brains out tonight.
They eat raw liver, lose weight, gain weight, yell at sound guys, or text in character as Abraham Lincoln. But why? Why do they do this? Why do they put themselves and others through so much discomfort? Who on earth invented this outrageous technique? And why are actors and audiences still so fascinated by it? We're going to try our best to answer all those questions here in our Beginner's Guide to Method Acting.
That's what's really important, isn't it? That's what you want to know.
Let's start with something Robert Pattinson said recently, and this will be the first time ever in my life, maybe the last time, that I actually quote Robert Pattinson. Him and J-Lo interviewed each other. Yeah, I know, that's a weird combo. Him and J-Lo interviewed each other for a show on Variety, and Jenny asked him about his role on The Lighthouse, and how it seemed like he had to stay in it the entire time. Seeing him in The Lighthouse definitely gives that impression. He's very intense. Oh, that's intense. But he responded to J-Lo's question by saying that no, he can't stay in character all day. He needs to know that there's an end to the performance, that the director can say cut, and he can stop being an assistant lighthouse keeper losing his marbles and just be Rob. He looks like more of a Robbie to me. Who might argue? But then he says something interesting.
You only ever see people doing the method when they're playing an asshole.
It's a big claim, but nowadays it's kind of true, and it's not so much about the method itself. It may just be that many modern actors don't really understand what it is. Jared Leto's a great example to sum up this modern misunderstanding. He got famous, really famous, very young, playing a heartthrob in My So-Called Life. In the years following that role, he got parts in more intense movies, like The Thin Red Line, Fight Club, and Requiem for a Dream. None of these are light movies. But he became properly famous because of his emo band, 30 Seconds to Mars, which became one of the biggest musical acts on Earth. So people were surprised when Leto, the lead singer of this emo band, decided to play a transgender woman in Dallas Buyers Club. But he won an Oscar and a Golden Globe, and all of a sudden he's considered a serious actor.
Now, what the hell does that mean?
And then he gets offered the role of Joker in Suicide Squad. For any actor trying to prove themselves, this is the role. Remember, only a few years earlier, Heath Ledger had played the Joker in The Dark Knight. He had taken the role very seriously, locking himself in a hotel room for a month, writing in his diary as the Joker. The role for which he won a posthumous Oscar single-handedly redefined how people think about superhero movies. But it also became mythical because of Ledger's tragic death before the movie came out. Only a few months after he filmed The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger died of an overdose of sleeping pills. People instantly connected Ledger's passing with the character he had just played, and the public narrative around his death became Heath Ledger went crazy playing the Joker. Although what probably happened was that as his insomnia got worse, he tried to treat it with sleeping pills, and one night he went overboard. Whatever happened, the role of the Joker became mythical, and at the time it seemed untouchable. No one could possibly want to go near something so sacred, something that Heath Ledger had supposedly died for. But Jared Leto did. And after his Oscar-winning performance in Dallas Buyers Club, the expectations were high. If he didn't go all out for this, people wouldn't just be disappointed, they would be offended. So Leto decided to go method for the role. He stayed in character at all times on set.
Jared, he went full Joker, and the rule generally is never go full Joker.
Will Smith, who played Deadshot in Suicide Squad, said that he never met Jared Leto in the 6 months of filming. He only met the Joker. And then there were the gifts.
It's a gift from the Joker.
And going in there! Psych!
The first time the whole cast met up for a table read, Jared Leto sent them a dead pig. Sick move. He put beads in each of his co-stars' trailers. Margot Robbie got a love letter and a pet rat. But is this method acting, or is this just workplace harassment? If you're an actor who likes to go all in, where do you draw the line? What is real life and what is acting? Well, that may be an impossible question to answer, but to truly define the method and why it's gone so far today, it may help to go back to Marilyn Monroe.
Don't you feel alone out on a big ocean? Well, I just adore conversation, don't you?
In 1955, Monroe was pretty much the most famous person on Earth. She was like a human Coca-Cola bottle. She symbolized America, money, success, freedom, you name it. You know those mermaids they would have on the front of old sailboats? If Western pop culture was a sailboat, Marilyn Monroe would have been the mermaid on the front. But even though she was famous, she didn't feel fulfilled.
Well, I always have a secret feeling that I'm really a fake or something.
She felt like she was being typecast as the dumb blonde, and she wanted more to chew on. So she went to New York to study at the Actors Studio. The studio still exists today, but back then, it was revolutionary.
The method essentially is terribly human, profoundly human thing.
It had been founded by a group of young writers and directors who were influenced by a Russian guy named Konstantin Stanislavski. Stanislavski had invented a new acting technique which he called the system. In short, his version of method is what everyone today thinks of as acting. But before him, acting was different. The classical style, which used to be the only style, was based on character archetypes and super exaggerated. It was meant for theater, where the audience was further away from the performer. So the actor would communicate rage by shaking their fists or contorting their face into an exaggerated frown. Maybe if they were happy, they'd jump up and down. But then theater began to change. Playwrights and directors started to become more interested in portraying the world as it is, or was. For the first time, plays started to be about normal people who did things like set the table for dinner or tie up their shoes before going outside. But for this to work, acting had to change too, so Stanislavski thought that to portray real believable characters, the actors could just channel their own emotions by recalling situations from their own lives. By the 1950s, this had caught on in a major way, but a guy named Lee Strasberg, who co-founded the Actors Studio, took it further. He thought that extrapolating from your own personal experience of an emotion wasn't enough. He thought you had to really experience it, to relive that feeling on stage or in front of the camera, and so the method was created. Anyway, he becomes Marilyn Monroe's teacher and they become close. So close that he gives her private lessons, and for a little while she even lives with him and his wife Paula, which might have been a little weird, but who knows. Strasberg even convinced her to go see a therapist because he thought it would help her to get more in touch with her past, which was a method acting goldmine. She had never known her dad, and her mother had been committed to a psychiatric hospital when she was 8. So most of Marilyn's childhood was spent bouncing around between foster care and orphanages. It was, by her own admission, a painful time that she didn't want to relive. But the whole point of method acting is to dig up these experiences and then to relive them, and that's what she did. After training with the Strasbergs, Marilyn went on to act some of her most iconic roles, like Misfits, Bus Stop, The 7-Year Itch, and of course, Some Like It Hot. In The Prince and the Showgirl from 1957, you can really see the method at work. Her co-star is Laurence Olivier, who is an all-time acting great. He acts in the old style, putting on a funny accent and being grand. He does a good job, but next to Monroe, he looks lifeless.
Excellent. What?
At this point, the method is catching on with other big actors too, like James Dean, another Actors Studio student, and Marlon Brando, who people pretty much see as the Michael Jordan of acting. But these three have something else in common other than method acting. They all have famously tragic private lives. Two of them, Monroe and Dean, died super young. Monroe's death, an overdose, was ruled a probable suicide, and Dean's, whether it was intentional or not, has been romanticized ever since. He drove his silver Porsche head-on into another car. The public perception of these people has gone the same way as Heath Ledger. They've been cast as these tragic figures, tortured artists who died for their craft. Because the method asks actors to draw on their own experiences, it's tempting to view their on-screen personas as extensions of their real-life selves.
You guys need to keep pushing, man.
You took my burger.
Dean, Brando, and Monroe are all icons because when they act, they don't really seem like they're acting. As James Franco said in an essay on Shia Labeouf, Brando's performances revolutionized American acting precisely because he didn't seem to be performing, in the sense that he wasn't putting something on as much as he was being. We'll get back to Shia Labeouf later, but the blurring of performing and being is important for what comes next. These actors were seen in real life and in their movies as pretty much the same. Their movies worked because their performances seemed real. Their characters, James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, Marilyn Monroe in The Misfits, Marlon Brando in On the Waterfront, they all seemed like real people who had existed before the movie and would continue to exist after the credits rolled. And they kinda did, because they were playing versions of themselves. But through no fault of their own, this suffering was romanticized, like it was with so many other artists. River Phoenix, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Vincent van Gogh, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse. The list goes on. People have this crazy fixation on the suffering artist. Although lots of creative people suffer for their craft, method acting doesn't require you to relive traumatic experiences from your childhood. It's about trying to empathize, using your own emotional memory with what the character might be feeling in that moment.
You're tearing me apart! What?
You don't have to drag yourself through hell and back just to play a part. But then, there's another method that took hold. It's the one that probably looks more familiar to us today. It's the one where actors don't so much lock themselves in a room and think about their childhood. It's the one where they immerse themselves in the world of their character by physical means or by doing the actual things that the character might do. Take Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. He plays a tortured Vietnam veteran who drives a taxi to stave off insomnia. To prepare for the role, he got his taxi license and for a whole month worked nights as a cab driver in New York. In Raging Bull, he trained with the real-life boxer he was trying to portray. For the second half of the movie, to be true to the story, he gained so much weight that he had trouble breathing and talking.
Let's face it, it was you, Charlie.
And then there's Daniel Day-Lewis, who goes to famously extreme lengths for his roles. For The Last of the Mohicans, he learned to hunt and skin animals. He built his own canoe, and he took the gun he used in the movie everywhere with him, even to Christmas dinner. In My Left Foot, he played a disabled man who had to use a wheelchair, so Day-Lewis used a wheelchair too. For the whole duration of the shoot, he went everywhere in it. When he played a Czech man in The Unbearable Lightness of Being, he learned Czech. When he played Abraham Lincoln, he stayed in character as Lincoln all the time. Sally Field, who played Lincoln's wife, said that, "I never met him, never. I met him as Mr. Lincoln. He met me as his Molly," as he called her, and that's how we knew each other. He even signed his text messages with the letter A for Abe, although it's not very Abraham Lincoln of him to be using text messages. According to The Guardian, when he was making The Crucible, he stayed on a Massachusetts island in the film set's replica village without electricity or running water, planted fields with 17th century tools, and built his character's house. Christian Bale, who thinks he has a very sissy job, his quote, is famous for this too. To prepare for The Machinist, where he played a guy who hadn't slept in months, he lost more than 60 pounds. As soon as he was done filming that movie, he gained it all back, and more, for Batman Begins. But is this method acting? Is it an extreme version of it? Is it a misunderstanding of it? Well, it's tough to say. There isn't just one way to do it. Even back in the 50s, there were already 3 people advocating for their own different versions of the method. There was Strasberg, who wanted the all-out emotional kind. Stella Adler, who was Marlon Brando's mentor, thought that you could just imagine things within the context of the scene. A third strand, invented by Sanford Meisner, was about repeating lines and doing step-by-step exercises to get out of your head and into the intuitive actions of the scene.
What's your point? What's my point? Yeah, what's your point?
One thing that all 3 of these schools have in common is that none of them require actors to stay in character all the time. Same goes for living in a forest, building your own house, gaining or losing a bunch of weight. All these things are personal choices. So why do actors keep doing this? Well, some people do it properly. They don't bother anyone, and they do a good job. Daniel Day-Lewis.
I have a competition in me. I want no one else to succeed.
But others make it this thing. For those people, it may come down to 2 things, celebrity and personality. Remember when we were talking about the iconic personalities of Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, and Marlon Brando? The allure surrounding people who've died or gone crazy for their craft? Today, instead of amplifying one's own personality to create a character, the people who practice methods seem to be reforming, or maybe deforming, themselves to fit into that role. And the work that goes into that has become their version of the natural cool of James Dean. He was cool because he was a brooding, thoughtful heartthrob. He was sensitive, emotional, and he was doing the hard work of looking inside of himself. But today, the hard work of acting isn't about looking inside of yourself. It's about literally getting inside of a horse carcass, like Leonardo DiCaprio did on the set of The Revenant. A new kind of suffering is being mythologized. And a lot of people are worried that this kind of suffering is sucking the joy and the magic out of acting. Bette Davis, one of the greatest actors of all time, said it best.
And I always believed that acting was larger than life.
Which brings us back to Jared Leto. He's not really method acting, and he doesn't look real at all. In fact, he's wearing a ton of makeup. His hair is dyed green, and he's got those discount Lil Wayne tattoos all over his face. There's nothing believable about this character. It's completely over the top.
I could tell you meant that.
So maybe the days of actual method acting are gone, and the larger-than-life, if a little unbelievable, performances of old Hollywood are coming back into vogue.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Or the future could lie in a very different, but equally outrageous, Shia Labeouf. Earlier on, we talked about James Franco writing an essay on him. That's because of the stunts he started pulling about 5 years ago. He went to a movie premiere wearing a paper bag on his head. Written on the bag was the phrase, "I'm not famous anymore." Ever since, he's been making all these art projects where he invites the public to interact with him as a celebrity. He's kind of going the opposite route of most actors who claim to be method today. Instead of publicly performing being an actor and bragging about the insane lengths he's going to, he's actually performing himself as a celebrity. And just this year, he made a movie about himself called Honey Boy. In it, he plays his own dad. That is both the most method thing you could possibly do and the least. And whether or not his art and his new movie are any good, he's dealing with the same thing that actors in the public eye have been dealing with for a very long time. But instead of trying to find the sweet spot between living a private life and putting on these public performances that are informed by the same private life, Shia has just decided to make everything public. Maybe this type of meta-autobiography is the future of acting.
Whether I was acting, whether I was doing music or whatever it is, I give myself to something. What's your bit?
Then again, maybe not. Either way, method acting is not the same as it used to be, but it also hasn't disappeared. It's just changing. Just like classical acting changed and gave way to method acting is changing and giving way to something else. What do you think that something is? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video half as much as I did, subscribe to Behind the Screen. because there is a lot more where that came from, or there will be soon. We're still making videos. Bye-bye.